Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the gap. The gaping gap that is going to kill your TSP if you are not careful or if you don't do something about it. Okay, so we're going to go through what this gap is, why people are surprised at how big this gap becomes, and a couple things that you might be able to do to make sure this doesn't happen to you, so you're well aware of why this happens and what you can do to prevent it for you and your FERS retirement. Okay, so people are always worried about running out of money in retirement, right? And that's generally what they're referring to as their TSP. They're really hoping that their retirement savings make it through their whole life, right? That is their goal. But the gap that most federal employees really struggle with, that really kills their TSP, is the first few years of retirement. And that is because, according to OPM, the average retiree, the day they retire, the average one retires at age 61, okay? So, the earliest age that you can take Social Security is 62. That's the earliest age. And I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of starting Social Security early in this video. That's not what I'm going to do. But oftentimes, I'll just suffice it to say, oftentimes it makes a lot of sense to not take Social Security at 62. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes, probably the majority of times, I don't want to say anything that's going to make you think one way or the other, but oftentimes it does make sense for someone to wait, let's say, to their full retirement age, which is going to be 66, 67 for most people, or even to age 70, even longer. So for the average Fed, if they're going to wait and going to delay Social Security, they're going to be waiting, let's say, 6, 7, 8 years before they start Social Security. And Social Security is a huge part of most people's retirement, and honestly is probably going to be a huge portion of federal employees' retirement. And of course, you do have your pension, you have your TSP, you have those other elements, but not having Social Security can really have a huge gap in your income that you are really going to miss during that time. So let's look at an example. So where most people go wrong is at first they overestimate what they're going to get from their pension during this time, okay? During the course of their whole retirement, but especially during this time, it makes a big difference. So let's do an example, just easy numbers. Let's say you have a high 3 of 100 grand. Let's say you have 30 years of service, multiplier of 1, right? So that means your annual pension is going to be right around 30 grand, okay? Just simple math. If you don't know the equation for your pension, just look it up. It's everywhere. But basically, let's say your pension is 30 grand a year, okay? So that's how much is fixed income that you don't have to worry about. Now let's say your lifestyle, you do cool things, it's not too extravagant, it's pretty modest, right? Let's say 50 grand a year, okay? So there's a 20 grand gap that you need to fill somehow during this time, right? Once you start Social Security, a lot of that gap is gonna be filled, but before then, you have to make up 20 grand every year from some source. And let's say you take it from your TSP, right? Let's say you retire at 61 and you start filling that 20 grand gap from your TSP, and let's say you don't start taking Social Security till the latest, let's say 70, right? So that means for 9 years, you are taking 20 grand out of your TSP, right? That is a huge amount of money, and depending on how much you have in your TSP, let's say if you have 4 million, it's not going to be a big deal. But for many federal employees, they don't have that much money in there, right? And to take 20 grand, let's say for 5 years, right? 20 grand for 5 years adds up to a lot. That's 100 grand, boom, right there, before they even get into probably the bulk of their retirement. Now, once their Social Security starts kicking in, maybe they won't need much, right? It depends on what you need, and you have to kind of look at your numbers for you. What makes sense for you? Some people, let's say they're working till age 67. Maybe they're working that long, and that's when they're going to start Social Security, and so they really won't have a gap. But many federal employees, like I said, the average retires at age 61, will have this issue. Now, let me refer to my handy dandy notebook. So, regardless of how you choose to fill this, like I said, some people this may not be an issue because they have other sources of income, maybe a retirement from the military. Maybe your TSP is hefty enough where it's like, hey, I'm good. Or maybe it's not very hefty, but it will be enough to get you to Social Security. And once you start Social Security, then you'll be fine. Maybe let's say with your pension, with Social Security, you have 60 grand worth of income every year. And then basically, after that, you just need 50 grand for your living. Now you want to take into account taxes. Now you want to take into account, let's say, a survivor benefit out of your pension, your FEHB, Medicare, all these things. You want to make sure you get these into your numbers. And that's where a lot of people go wrong, is they overestimate what they're going to get from their pension. They don't take out their FEHB premium. They don't take out the taxes. They don't take, let's say if you elect the survivor's benefit, a full survivor's benefit for your spouse, then you're going to get 10% less from your pension. So make sure these are all in your numbers for retirement so that you're not surprised. You're not surprised like, wow, we've got 20 grand every year to fill during this time. And like I said, 20 grand may not be a big deal for you in your retirement savings, but it might be if your retirement savings aren't where they need to be. And the problem is, in retirement, some of your TSP, sometimes it makes sense to invest that, right? So it's growing, it keeps up with inflation, and throughout, let's say, 30 years of retirement, your standard of living can stay the same because it keeps up with inflation. And let's say healthcare costs, other costs are going to keep going up and up and up. And if you don't have some investments to kind of follow that trend, then your standard of living might just drop, right? Depending on all your numbers. So it's really important that you don't kill your TSP at the very beginning of retirement if you're going to rely on it down the road after you start Social Security. So I know I jumped around a little bit, but that is the problem that many people are facing. And sometimes the answer is simply, hey, I need to work a little longer to have a few more years to put some money in the TSP and a few less years of retirement to think about. Or maybe it's a reverse mortgage, or maybe it's something else, right? Something to fill that gap. And like I said, for some people it's not that big of a deal just to go straight from their TSP. I don't know your situation. I don't know what makes sense for you, but you should. You should look at your situation and say, hey, for me, this is what makes sense. This is what I need to do to make sure that gap is filled and I could have an incredible retirement the whole time. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next time. And again, thank you for making it to the end of my video, the end of my podcast. I hope this brought value to you and your life. My goal with this content is to bring as much value to as many people as I possibly can. So please, if you can, if this brought value to you, please show your support, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, comment, give me feedback about what you want to hear about, what you want to learn about, and how you can get more value out of this, and so that I could do the very best I can to make this the best channel for my viewers, for my listeners, the very best I can. So again, thank you for being here and investing in yourself and in your future. And I will see you next week.